Hey, what's going on, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of Crashing Convos. In this episode, we have Kirk. Kirk is somebody I had met over the phone. I was trying to handle some personal business, and we got into an existential conversation. I thought it would be interesting to interview on the podcast to discuss some of his ideas. In this episode, we can get into it. I do not have any sponsors, so that way I could maintain, say what I want to say and how I want to say it, and interview who I want to interview. But thinking about doing some type of Patreon thing, so not really sure about that. It'd be strange to make money off of this. I just really enjoy conversating with people, kind of picking their brain and understanding who they are. But without further ado, sit back, relax, grab your favorite beverage, and enjoy this conversation as we get into the weeds. Like I talked to you about on the phone. I mean, it was pretty wild, like how we kind of got into that conversation, not expecting that. I went in for like trying to refinance some stuff, and then got you, and then we kind of got off on this tangent. And it was the tangent. The last podcast I had a buddy of mine I ride with, named John Castillo, and he got into his story of how God came into his life as he sees it, so we got into that, and then I kind of took a little break from that, just kind of processing all those thoughts, kind of going down different rabbit holes of trying to understand it, going through different texts and, reading the Bible I got. And just, I don't know, I'm still on that like path, if you will. But
Right.
with that, it's so nuanced, and like, it's kind of hard to, how can I say this? Because there's so many different religions, so many different ideas of God. And then on top of that, there's so many different Bibles. You know what I mean? Even within Christianity, there's so many different Bibles. But I found it fascinating how you were talking about how you read each chapter, not like in chronological, like as the book is kind of unfolded for us. But yeah, so that's what fascinated me. That's what, I brought you here. You said you did some research with some friends of yours, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I've heard all the all the arguments, like maybe against the Bible or the validity of God's word, and usually it comes from something that they've heard, and like you say, other Bibles. What have you researched into other Bibles, and do you know what that even means?
Well, in the sense of like, there's like these different like interpretations of the King James version, or the, like, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and then there's all these different authors that kind of decipher the Bible in their way of how they interpret it for others to digest it. So that's what I mean in that, from that perspective, at least within
Well,
Christianity.
well, if we just tackle that alone, which that's a good place to start, is is God's word reliable? And is it God's word? Is it man's interpretation? Did man write it? Of course, man wrote it down, and they recorded it because we're reading it. But you know, the the to get to an understanding of the origin of where those words came from, you'd have to go to each individual translation. Now, have you ever tried translating? Is there another language that you speak? Do you speak
Spanish.
you speak Spanish? Perfect example. Now, I've seen people that don't speak very good English that speak good Spanish, and they try to write something in English. Do you see how like the words are misplaced, and they're not, the idea isn't exactly conveyed correctly? Does that
Mm-hmm.
make sense? In
Yes.
writing, in writing. So that's exactly what we're dealing with the Bible. The original language was Hebrew and Aramaic in the Old Testament. A lot of the New Testament was written in Greek. However, the original sources spoken, and I've done deep dives into this, were probably Hebrew. Everybody spoke Hebrew, but it was translated originally, um, and written down in a picture language. And so, if you look at Chinese and Japanese, those are pictures. And so, you heard the story: a picture says a thousand words. So there's different ways that you can look at a picture on a picture language and convey the thought. If one is by eyesight, you can tell the meaning, but now we're going to convert it into words, a picture
Mm-hmm.
language. And so all of the newer versions, like the NIV and the New King James and the English Standard Version, they're only been around about 40 or 50 years. And each one of them, they all went back to the original sources, and they had a different way of taking those original manuscripts and converting it in a different way. In other words, one of the versions is a paraphrase. So they'll look the translators looked at what it said in the original text, and they paraphrased what it was trying to say. Other versions were word for word. But sometimes if you're strictly word for word, like if you're word for word in Spanish and you're bringing it over in English, it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't always work that way. The thought is missed sometimes. And so it isn't that there's all these Bibles and they're all saying different things, because they say the same thing different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And then some there's another problem going on here too. We're all human, and so when we read a concept that we're not sure what it's saying, we're subject in translating it. You're subject to the translator's idea of what it said. In other words, there's a scripture that says that it's harder for a rich man to go to the kingdom of God than a camel to go through the eye of a needle.
Mm.
Now, the idea of an eye of a needle is very, very small, and this giant camel is going to go through it. So what is it really saying? After after doing a lot of research on some of these problematic verses, there's always an answer. It's just that either we're missing the answer or we're not sure what they're actually trying to say. Like in English, if you say you can't face the music, and that's a saying, right? That's a saying. But if you convert it in Japanese, they're saying, man, those people in America, they literally can't face where the music's coming from. You know,
Mm-hmm.
but that's an English saying, right? That's it. In Hebrew, it's called an idiomatic language. In other words, it's a saying. In a culture, they would know what that means.
Mm-hmm.
But to take this other idea of the camel to go through the eye needle, that word in Hebrew of that's needle, it's actually also can mean a thick rope. So I'm sorry, for camel. So what it's really saying, it could be saying, is that it's harder for a thick rope to go through the eye of a needle, but it can go through if it goes strand by strand, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a whole lot of things going on, but I think it's not fair for somebody to just turn away from God and his word by saying some of these they're cliche, they're sayings that people say without actually diving in and knowing what it really is conveying to us. There really was an original language, and there was really an original text that was written down, and that's where all of our modern day translations come from. Now, there are counterfeits as well. The Catholic Bible is a good example, and so is the book of not the Book of Mormon, but the other book. I'm sorry, the Jehovah's Witness version. They use what's called the New World Translation. They 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 paint the picture through the idea that you and I are gods. You are a god, I'm a god, and Jesus was a god, and the devil was a god, and everybody's a god, and we're gonna have a planet, we'll have babies, and we'll all have our own godhood, right? Well, that was the first sin from the from Adam and Eve, saying that the devil is tricking Eve and saying, no, God's holding it back from you. He knows in the day that you eat it, you will become God, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that religion literally took that same sin from the Garden of Eden as repeating it. So they take verses like John 1:1, where it says, in the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God. And they go, in the beginning was the word, and the word was a God. They change some of those. So there's some counterfeits completely that should be disregarded, but all the other versions are coming from an original language. And you got to go deeper than that. You know, if something was said in Spanish originally, it would be ignorant of me to take the English translation of it and ask an English person what the Spanish person said in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they go, oh well, there's just a bunch of languages, and you know, no, somebody actually said something, and it really had meaning to it, and maybe there was an event that took place, a car crash, and some writer in some reporter in Mexico wrote it down, and he was there, and he was an eyewitness. But now we're reading it in English, and it was converted, and I'm going to ask somebody over here what they, well, no, that really didn't happen. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's like the Bible actually has real people, real places, real events, and real eyewitness testimonies that wrote down what really took place. And it is a matter of faith. Everything's a matter of faith. If you think about it, you have to place your faith in anything you're doing. Even in this broadcast, you got to have faith that there's going to be people watching it. Otherwise, if nobody watches it, what's the point of doing this?
Yeah, actually, the way I think about it, just that last part, and I'm still processing everything you're saying. And like before I go on, if there's any like, if I ask any questions, it's more of a state of curiosity. I'm not trying to like tell you to
Sure, yeah,
believe in
yeah.
something else or anything like that. It's just really like my natural curiosity with this, and it's like me kind of opening boxes from when I was growing up and see if it's a conditioning thing and there's a lot of different reasons why, but a lot of the questions I'll ask or talk about different understandings or what have you. That's all it is really, and I'm not trying to attack you in any way or anything and I'm just
No
listening
way.
to yeah.
It's
um
my honor to be here. It's my honor to go through that with you. If God really appreciates somebody that's seeking, and we're all at different levels.
right. And
I mean,
so
not everybody. Anybody seeking is at a different level. If you're not seeking, that's a whole different story.
right.
So,
And I don't know if I wasn't before or like I'm just at a different place to be more aware of it, right? And it's kind of going down these different paths of understanding, like exploring, not necessarily like following or anything, because like Buddhism isn't a religion. It's just like a way of life, just like Taoism.
hmm
But with that, there are these different factions and understandings, and then you kind of factor in like, well, this religion is a lot older than this religion, and then going back to his translations, like Sumerian and these older texts that and then these ideas that like the Bible was like taking pieces of like other like the seven tablets of creation, like which is Sumerian Babylonian ideas. But I've been going down that and I haven't really came across anything other than like the bigger picture, like when over like 7 days God created, but in this sense it's different, written differently. I'm not even ready to go into that. But with all that, it's just um yeah, I mean, going into when I was growing up and the way it was talked about, and if I ever asked any questions, it was like, a couple of times some people told me I was, the devil for asking questions or whatever. But it was like a different understanding, like a different like depth of faith that if you even questioned or anything about God or anything about the Bible, then like you were evil pretty much. That's the way I was
Oh,
brought
right.
brought up into it.
Were
So
you in a Catholic background, or
no,
what is
I
your
was
background?
I believe my mom was Baptist, and then she kind of did the non-denominational thing for a little bit, but like still believing in the New Testament. That's kind of what she read, or not kind
Yeah,
of. That's what she read. She talked about
sure.
like she used to have Bible studies at the house, so it was like one of those things that was all the time, and it was like, but at the same time, you weren't allowed to ask questions. So fast forward, honestly, like even now, like I don't live like I don't want to say I'm a bad person, but at the same time, I still I make mistakes, I curse, I do all these different things. And then to go back to, going through the eye of a needle or making it to heaven, believe the translation you said was supposed to be a rope. Either
Yeah.
way, but that maybe it's just a lazy way of thinking, but it's also like, well, if I cannot follow these 10 commandments, then it's impossible to live that way. So therefore I am going to hell because I cannot live on this perfect straight and
Right.
narrow path because I'm human and I, have wants and,
Yeah,
temptations, etc. And with
right.
all that, it's like, how do I even? So it's almost like it was easier for me just to kind of, you know, I mean, I was in the military at the time as well, and I just went down like that was my world. That's what I did. The mission, all that stuff. I really didn't think too much far outside unless, every once in a while I'd come back into my purview, the idea of God, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that's kind of what brings us here.
Well, hey, that's great. That's a good way, good honest approach. And asking questions the only way you can find answers, because we should have tons and tons of questions, and then the more answers we find should lead us to more questions. So it's a deep dive now, and that's kind of what I want to talk about at some point, um, to convert this into some big, thick, old, dusty, well, that's the Old Testament, New Testament, that's the Bible, and that's like these other ancient writings. Um, I as a Christian, I guess you'd say, coming in from a Catholic understanding and walking into a non-denominational recreation center, I went in to play basketball. I didn't go into a church service. And they happened to have a church service there, which I didn't know it was a church service. I thought it was a play because I saw Batman and Robin on the stage, and I thought it was a play. So I had no interest in any church service.
Right.
Oh, okay, so that led me into a really wild, different understanding of how church could be, because I thought it was stained glass mirrors and kneeling, sitting, doing holy water, and leaving. I did that for 20 years of my life, and wow, God used that in a great way. And I'd love to hear more about the gentleman you had on your last show, a little bit of paraphrasing where you think his testimony came from. But for me, I dove in as much as I could to learn as much as I could. I got every Christian. I was on every Christian radio station. I went to church 3 times a week just to hear the sermon and their preaching of the whatever text it was. But it was heavily dominated with the New Testament. And the way I tell my kids and what I've learned to help them understand and unravel some Christian misunderstandings, because believe it or not, there are Christian misunderstandings, a lot of them. And one of them is heaven and hell, this idea of heaven and hell, of which I'd like to talk about any of these subjects at any time. But I'll just continue my thought process here. I tell them and I share with them, because we do go to church still, and it's really good for the kids, good for my wife, it's good for us. And there's a lot of truth that's spoken. But real wisdom is to discern where the lies are. And I think the lies are what the question askers, they know the lies, they see the lies. They go, that just doesn't make sense. And they can't find the answer. So they kind of throw the whole thing out, you know. But real wisdom is to actually discern what's true, because there can be truth and a lie buried in the middle of it.
Hmm.
And then not know, then it all seems like it's a lie. And then you can't get an answer. And oh, hey, don't ask any questions. But the way I tell my kids is that it's like the Christians, for the most part, I would say a high percentage, even the wisest teachers, they are looking at a movie and they started it halfway through. If whatever movie it is, think of a good movie. Could you imagine if you missed the first half of the movie and you picked it up halfway through? You're gonna get the ending. Jesus died. He rose from the dead. That's where they pick it up. It's all true. It's
Hmm.
amazing. It's an amazing story. And God is a humble God. His name isn't even Jesus. The letter J was invented 400 years ago.
Yeah, I
Um,
saw yeah. I'm trying to remember how to say it. I went down a rabbit hole of like his actual name pre-translation and like it was like Yahuwah or Yo. I don't
really,
remember, but
hey, that's very, very good. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you just broke up. You're saying that's really good. What?
Yeah, that's a good That's a very good possible translation of his name. It could be Yahuwah.
Yeah, it was something like that, but it wasn't a J.
Hmm.
It was pronounced different.
Well, the letter J was invented 400 years ago, and if you think about it, it looks a lot like the I, right? The
Hmm.
the the J follows the I. It's uh, the ya sound became a hard J, but about 400 years ago, because the English language uh, evolved from the Germanic language. The Germanic language evolved from the Latin language, and that all came after Jesus, or after Yeshua, let's say.
Yeah, that's
I
what I
mean,
say.
the Son
Yeshua.
of God. We'll just say
Yeah,
the Son of God.
got you.
So I mean, what I was trying to say though is because the movie was started halfway through and the texts do say what they say and there are literal meanings to it. However, it would be like watching some scenes from a movie that you haven't seen the plot, how it began, and you didn't see the character development, and you didn't see the main themes of the movie. And so when it ends, you're like, well, you're then repeated to somebody else, and that didn't mean what it meant to them because they watched the whole movie, let's say,
Hmm.
or they haven't seen the movie and you're trying to tell them what it was like, but you didn't really watch the beginning. Um, so the what I found through many years of plotting the Old Testament chronologically is we found that God made an agreement, and it's in the Bible. It's very hard to find them all in
So you just said it was very hard to find them.
the agreements.
Got
That
you.
they're called covenants, and some are easy to find. There's one with Adam in the beginning that he broke a very simple covenant, a contract that God made with him is just don't eat that tree.
Hmm.
But then 1,000 years later, he made one with Noah, a covenant, and his covenant was different than the ones after it because his covenant was he was going to make a boat, and that boat was going to put the animals, two of each kind, seven of the clean animals and two of all the other ones, 7 by 7 and 2 by 2 on the ark, and there's going to be a flood. And when he does that, he's going to make a new covenant with Noah and all of the people that will be born after him. And then the storyline changes when a man named Abram is introduced, and he makes a new covenant with Abram that Abraham would be would get a land of his own. And then right after that, about 13 years later, he made another covenant with Adam that he would have a son, and that son would have many sons, and they would inherit that land. And so the storyline then thickens when you get to the book of Exodus. That's all in Genesis right there, those covenants. When you get to Exodus, the whole climax of the point of Exodus is Moses going into Egypt and taking God's people, who were Abraham's descendants,
Hmm.
who had multiplied for 400 years according to the covenant he made with Abraham. Now, Abraham's dead at this point. He made a covenant, a contract with Abraham, and he's good on it because it was his word. His word is bound by a covenant, and he was good on it. And he brought them out of slavery according to his covenant. In order to make a covenant for the first time in human history, 2,500 years after Adam sinned in the garden, this is the first time in history he made a covenant with more than one person. He made it with an entire nation, but they broke it right away. They broke that contract, that covenant, in many ways. Right at Mount Sinai. That was the point of them going to Mount Sinai to enter a covenant. Now, covenant is a marriage. A marriage has all the aspects to it that we still have in modern day marriages. You have the two witnesses. You have the bridegroom and the bridesmaid, and then you have the parties. Some sit on the bride's side, some sit on the groom's side, and that represents a blood covenant where the parties would in ancient days would walk down the center of these split pieces. That's what they represent, even in modern day.
Hmm.
They're not sure where this comes from, but it comes from a biblical blood covenant. where the parties would walk down the center. They'd split the animals. This blood would be split, and this is the whole idea where blood brothers comes from. This commitment to death, and that was the commitment. If you break your word in this ancient blood covenant, you die. And so this gets to the theme of what you mentioned about not keeping the Ten Commandments and you're just human and the whole thing. That was actually the literal agreement at Mount Sinai, the Ten Commandments, and they were expected to keep it, but they couldn't keep it. And that's when God discovered, he knew this ahead of time, but he allowed man on his own effort to be good on their word, which is the Ten Commandments, and they couldn't. They broke it over and over again. That he would send his son to pay for that broken covenant at Mount Sinai that they all broke. And it actually pays for the blood since Adam, since he broke the covenant. And then he would then write the Ten Commandments on our hearts. That's what he did. That's what being born again, if you've heard that phrase, you've probably been around a while to hear that phrase quite a bit.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
And I'm sure that's what happened to this. The Holy Spirit is telling me this. Whatever your last guest testimony was, that's what happened to him when he met God. God supernaturally wrote the Ten Commandments on his heart. And so now, by his own nature, he wants to do the things of God. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, I mean, based off of that, yeah, that makes sense.
He doesn't want any other gods. That's commandment one. He doesn't want to have any idols. He doesn't want to take his name in vain. You honor your father and mother. Don't murder. Don't hate your brother. Don't commit adultery. Don't look at a woman with lust. All the things that are hard for us.
Yeah,
they
yeah, and
they are
that's
hard.
yeah. I mean, yeah, definitely. I mean, and today with technology and information, the way it goes, and then just the way things are highlighted, marketed, etc., it just kind of makes it harder for people, I guess. And we can get into that part of it, but yeah, and I hear what you're saying, and I understand what you're saying, and it's like I get the concept of it, and it's still like, yeah, I mean, based off that, and it's like this battle back and forth with me, right? It's just because I haven't heard it necessarily laid out like that before, and it makes sense if you can try to systematically like identify what the covenants are, and then talk about how they couldn't uphold one of those covenants, and then you're just like, all right, well, since you guys couldn't do it, then I'm going to send my only son to sacrifice for your sins.
Yep.
And now it's so, not to say that people are off the hook and they can do whatever they want because he sent his only son, but at the same time, it's like we still have to abide by, like in Christianity, you have to abide by these commandments to, you know, walk the line, if you will. And which, I mean, it makes sense from the idea of like trying to keep a moral footing to move forward and like for, to live a good life, I guess. It like that's one of the things I feel that I kind of got away from stuff, because even whether or not like my faith was there, it still kind of kept me from doing stupid stuff, if that makes sense. And I made good decisions. I mean, probably because of my upbringing as well. Um, but yeah, it's going back to my last guest, John. That's what he was talking about. Like, just life wasn't going right, and then he um, was driving and with some bad thoughts in his head, and like he just felt like something. I asked him, was it like a voice? Was it a feeling? Like, what was it? He said it was like a feeling, like like I don't know, something really deep within him. It was like getting a hug.
Yeah.
And it was a feeling he couldn't.
Right.
What's that?
Right. I know what he's saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was that for you? Was there something like, because you said you were in the Catholic Church, or not in it, but that was your faith, and then something, was it just not feeling right? Was it just the
You
father
know,
that you're listening to, or?
Because it was probably a similar situation like yours. Now, I would think that in a Baptist church, I'm just guessing, they probably heard the gospel message many times. I never heard the simplicity of the gospel. I never heard, look, there's a man, he died on a cross for your sins. If you receive him, he'll forgive you and he'll make you come alive. He'll take your heart of stone, give you a heart of flesh, and you'll want to follow him. Just give your life to him. Never heard that. Never ever heard that. It was all just rituals, candle lighting and robes, and you have to go. You have to go. And maybe it was the same thought that you had of like asking questions, like you were always kind of turned away. I was just had to go, and I wasn't told why, and nothing ever really made a lot of sense. And so when I actually like saw it in a different way, and maybe that's what it'll take for you. Maybe it'll take you to like see God in a whole fresh approach.
Mm-hmm.
That they're actually teaching the Bible, and that's where it usually has to start. You really have to, and God can use any way to reach you, reach out anybody. I shouldn't just say you, anybody. He'll reach anybody anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but usually it's through His Word and somebody that's seeking. But you have to have this childlike belief. I think that's the real thing. And a problem is as we get adults, we become more jaded, more cynical,
Mm-hmm.
and God
Definitely.
doesn't accept that. I'll show you the verses that he doesn't accept it. Even the disciples themselves that were walking with Jesus, there was this argument that took place that they were arguing like, "Hey, when you come, I want to sit on your right hand. I want to sit next to you." And he says, "You don't know what you're asking." And he took a little child, sat him on his lap, and he said, "These are the greatest in the kingdom." They were arguing who is going to be the greatest in the kingdom.
Uh,
And he says, and he brings a little child. He says, "Unless your faith is converted like one of these, you'll never see the kingdom." And a child doesn't doubt. Child
mm-hmm.
believes their dad. He believes what his dad is telling him. And they believe in Santa Claus for a long time,
Yeah.
and because you tell them so.
Yeah.
You, you know,
I've
so
always, yeah.
go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, yeah, you can teach a child anything, from a little. I mean, they just believe, and I think that's what it is when he talked about not having the childlike. Not to say I've seen everything, but I did get jaded. Being in the military, you go to a lot of different countries, talk to a lot of different people, hear a lot of history from different, countries, and like, and plus, talking to people from different, places, in the military themselves and their experiences, and then, just going into, uh, the, the Crusades, and like, when Christians came over to the Americas, and they kind of just separated the natives from their kids, and like told them you were going to believe this, took away their culture, their names, their people, their and that's kind of still resonates like to today. Now I know that these were men doing that, but I'm trying to get to the point of that's one of the things that jaded me, right? It was just like, man, to have like this, and this is nuts. This is information I had to go seek out. It wasn't like, I want to say like in school, I wasn't taught those things. It was, more so like, I've talked about this with my wife too, and it was just like the, you know, Columbus came over, and they, met with the
Yeah,
Indians, and it was just like, and like broke bread and Thanksgiving, and that was kind of it. You didn't get like all the gruesome details of what happened, and I mean, it's not, it wasn't just here, as other countries as well.
right,
But
right.
to hear that, and then to kind of, and then going to the Vatican. I mean, I have the opportunity, and I've been blessed to go to a lot of different places in the Vatican, and it's just to see this place. It's beautiful. It's got gold everywhere. It's like, wow, this is a lot of money here, and we're not even talking about the library they have with these, you know ancient texts and stuff that no one can access. I mean, I think you have to request specifically what you're looking for, and then they'll approve it or not approve it. Um, and that could be wrong, but the last time I looked, pretty much what it was. But with that, it's just kind of, it's always a curiosity, right? Well, why does this entity have so much money, and yet when I
Right.
talk to people that are in Catholic churches locally at the ground level, it's they're always having fundraisers, and this money like is supposed to be for, I don't know, kids softball or whatever, like whatever sport it is. But then like it's like the mafia, like each layer takes their cut, and they only
Right.
get a certain, so they're always having to do these raffles to raise money for whatever facilities or sports or whatever. And then there's always being money taken off the top, archdiocese, the Vatican. And it makes sense when you go to the Vatican, and it's, I don't know if that's the true reality of it, but that's what the perception of it is. It's just like
Of
there's
course.
just these um really expensive, I can't think of it, priceless pieces of art and gold, and it's oh my god, it's crazy. And then the Sistine Chapel.
If the devil was real, uh, and he was going to try to dupe people, would
Right.
he come in? Would he come as a drunkard? Just all out of sorts, out of his mind, or in some secular way, or would he come in a religious way, um, propagating to people that you got to join our religion, and we know the truth, and you'll go to heaven by. That's literally what they say, that you have to be a member of our church to go to heaven, and it's purely demonic. It's pagan to the very root. That is a penis you went to. That's sorry. I think it's okay to say that on your show.
Yeah, you can say whatever. I don't.
It's actually a vagina and a penis there. That's what's happening there. And if you look at the skull, it's I'm sorry, the staff. It's a skull. His hat is a fish hat for the Dagon, the fish god. It's pagan idolatry to the maximum, and it's purely evil.
Yeah, I've seen,
Um,
I don't know this, I didn't get to go to this room, but if you look on the internet, there's like one room in there. That if you look at it from the back, it looks like a snake, which was pretty wild. I was
yeah,
like, I don't know if that's accurate because I didn't get to see that. And but if that is true, and there's many pictures that kind of validate, over and over, like from different angles. But either way, that'd be pretty crazy. And if that is the case, then yeah, it's
pro-
that would be
probably
the
the
ideal
summer.
way, right? If you're trying to get at it, if you're trying to discredit something, you would, and that's with anything, you would try to infiltrate in whatever the CIA does that. And
Right,
yeah,
right.
they infiltrate another organization and they kind of tear it apart from within.
From minute, yeah, you divide and conquer that way,
Right.
and you come as one of your own. You make it look like you're one of your own.
Hmm.
So I mean, and here's the key. Every religion will say that they're the way to go, but there was a person that walked on the earth that said he's the way to go. That's how you differentiate the truth. It's really simple. If they're saying you got to be part of our member, part of our organization, you got to be one of us, and only we know the way to go, and this is our truth, then you're going the wrong way, because there's a person that said that. The Son of God said that he's the way. So it's such a subtle thing. It seems like they're saying the same thing, but they're not. And you'll be able to tell, that you got to be baptized into our organization. You got to, and many denominations will say that. Many, the Mormon Church, you have to be baptized into their organization. Even the Seventh Day Adventists, you got to be baptized into their organization.
What was the last one?
There's
The seven
uh,
what?
Seventh Day Adventist.
Oh, I've never heard of that.
It's a Christian religious sect. Yeah,
Gotcha.
but there's truth. Again, there's truth in all of this, but there's lies in the middle. And it's like, to find the lies is really what we should be looking for,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah, and because there's also like the ideas too, and again, I'm just kind of, as I'm thinking about them, I'm kind of bringing them up, and it's not to, like, I'm not trying to throw volleys back and forth at you or nothing, but it's just really like these different things, these different paths that I've gone down to, um, like going back to translation, how they were talking about like when I don't know if it was Aramaic or I forget what the language was before that, but the way it was talked about, it wasn't God, it was gods or lords.
Yeah,
And
that's
then the
that's
translation has shifted from that to God. So it's like or was it monotheism?
hmm
Monotheism.
that's
But it
right.
used to be um gods. Does that make sense? I mean, it's not
hmm
doesn't make sense based off of what the New Testament says today, but um
You're saying that's what the translation said?
yeah, the original translation, according to the last thing I was reading. I'm trying to remember it right now. That's why I was like
It
pausing
actually
trying to
does say
remember.
that. It does say that. The last when you have time, or we could do it now, whenever you look at um the last sentence or the last verse in the book of Ecclesiastes, that word is plural for gods.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning, God has this whole dialogue when he's creating. He says, let us make man in our own image. That's plural.
Yeah, so
And
something
so,
like that, like and something like that as well. It's like and this kind of stems back to an experience I had when I was younger. But the idea of like aliens, not in the sense of like Hollywoodish, but an extraterrestrial, I guess, is the basis best way we could probably say it. But it's the idea of that is like in the book of Ezekiel, how it talks about creating like or there have been engineers that recreated what it says in the book of Ezekiel, and
oh,
it's like
wow.
yeah, I can probably send you the YouTube link of it,
Okay.
and yeah, and talking about God like us, like the image of us, like that very notion, like what I don't. It's a tough question to ask, and I always hesitate when I say it because even for me, it's like, what does that mean? Not in the sense of like, is it our could God be an extraterrestrial? Not in the sense of like an alien or anything like that, but just like humans, but from a different place. Or because if they're created in the image, if we're created in the image of God, then we would look like He does, not God Himself, but maybe how they used to exist. Because for some, when I think of God, I think of like omnipresent, like in,
Yeah.
in like there can be good and evil in anything and everything. And you can go back to the yin and yang. You could talk about, but like
Yeah.
polarity in general. But every person has the ability to be evil.
Right.
Whether or not it's like you feel that, right? Have you ever had when you were
Yeah.
younger, maybe not so much now, but you had an impulse like to do something, but you don't because you're like that wouldn't be
hmm
right. But there's like an
Right.
impulse, like I remember having this is jacked up. I'm gonna say this, but I remember having conversations with people when I was younger, and it would come through my mind, and I don't know why, but it would come through my mind. I could punch this person right now or slap them, and they wouldn't expect it, but I never did it, right? But it was just like I don't
Right.
know why that's coming to my head, but if you
Right.
were to react on that, I mean, that could have been. I mean, we could go into the path of like mischievous spirits or demons or what have you, like putting those thoughts in your head and do
hmm
that. Or maybe I don't know. I was just trying to release some stress. I'm not sure, but it's yeah. I forgot where I was going with
Well,
that, but
could it be, and I'll ask it in form of a question. I believe I know the answer, but could it be this whole idea of being born again? You have a whole new nature. And that's what this other man, last week, I guess, or last broadcast was talking about. You're changed, that your spirit inside of you has been changed. The Bible actually says it's been made alive. You've come to life, and in basically you're described. God describes us in a dead-like state, like you said, the impulses we want to follow. That doesn't necessarily change when you have a new nature, but now you have a new nature that you can overcome it. You can overcome things by feeding it, more good things, and more of the Holy Spirit is enveloped you. So the image of God, if you've ever been to a funeral or known of people in a funeral, their spirit is no longer inside of them. It's departed. You just have a shell of a person. So the God says that the spirit returns back to the one who gave it. So that spirit is what I believe is the image that you've been created, because it's kind of it's a false understanding to say that all people are born in God's image, because that isn't what the Bible says. You have to be born again before you're born in his image. You have to Jesus actually says he's inside of you. He
Mm-hmm.
now comes inside of you. And that's being in his image. Not that God has a nose and eyeballs, which we don't know, he might, but his spirit, because God is spirit, he doesn't have a human body, and
Mm-hmm.
he's all encompassing. So that part of that spirit comes inside of a born again heart. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, especially when you kind of just talk about like pure energy. Like, not to take it like, but I'm going somewhere with this. But I used to watch a lot of ghost hunter shows, just because
Oh,
that was kind of my thing growing up. That was the
right. Those are spirits, right?
right. So they would capture these anomalies, right, on the camera, right, and
Mm-hmm.
usually it was followed by a disembodied voice or a clear voice or what have you. But I just remember connecting those two parallels, like of energy, right? And if we are energy and God is energy, this all powerful energy can probably, that's how I would see it. If there would be a God, it would be all knowing. And I didn't understand it initially because I used to think of God like being in the clouds, and that very well could be the case. I don't know. I haven't been to heaven yet or met him, but in my mind, it's kind of like it could be whatever it needs to be. Like the energy can shift from one to another, like to either present himself or itself in whatever way it needs to connect with someone. If that make does that make sense?
Yeah,
Whether
right.
that's why they say God works in mysterious ways. I'm pretty sure you can take on any forms, whether it be a deer or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But my point is that, so consciousness and like that energy, that spirit, like every person that kind of comes into this world, for the most part, has a certain character type, right? And they you engage with any person, they kind of have this different, like, but maybe the consciousness or this energy is what God is talking about, the image, or at the very basis of our root, that is our soul, is, you know, that energy, that consciousness, that the part of the bigger, collective, you know, God. If all things are
Right.
connected, you talk about quantum mechanics and quantum physics and how like matter is all connected, then energy would too. Quantum entanglement, when galaxy blows up in one place, they, scientists have found it, like, blow up in another place as well. I don't know how they track all that, but based off of what I saw, like, I'm not smart enough to follow all that yet, but I'm curious about it, and I still go down those rabbit holes. But it makes sense, from that perspective and that understanding. And that's kind of why I have these conversations. That's kind of why it's seeking this. I don't know why I want to do it. I don't know. And it's not, I'm going to say this. I'm just like naturally curious about it. And it's like, I think when I find, as I go through my childhood, that's one of the big things that was part of my childhood. And one of the big things that kind of affects the way I view the world today, and how much, um, guilt or shame I have with certain actions that I've done in my lifetime. Um, and it's kind of, once I understand that, and you understand yourself as a child, then you can understand yourself now, understand why the way you are, and then try to make those changes, because that's what, it sucks and it's not easy to do, but I think it's necessary if you're going to continue to grow as a person, if that makes sense.
Right.
So with that, God is within that, right? Because that was such a big part of my childhood. My mom, that's what she always talked about. She, had, you know, would always pray. It was like such a big part, and I
Right.
can't overemphasize that, and I think I have.
Okay, so she was a good example then. Her like her essence,
Her faith
her
was
being.
her faith. I mean, like
Right.
not to say she was a horrible person, but she had her demons like everyone else does, and
Hmm.
with that, came a lot of stuff. But at the very essence of her, she like was love, if that makes sense.
Right. That makes sense. And that's actually the core of truth. That's the core, like that big hug you said the guy experienced.
Hmm.
God is love, and intellectually, I took an intellectual route when I came to Jesus. I felt His love, and His love compelled me. But then I went to study, and gather all this information, and then even in all the wisdom that I got through 4 or 5 years of putting the Old Testament chronological, putting the covenants together, God is love. What started as love, and I took this intellectual route to
Hold on, you're
connect all
coming.
the dots.
Yeah, you're
Now
coming
I
in.
intellectually see it. God is love, but it took me, I'm like,
You're coming in broken.
is it breaking up?
Yeah,
You
it's
there?
you're starting to come back.
Okay, I'm not sure where I left off, but
I got all the most of the
intellectually,
words, and then but
I'm
you at the very end of it, you said
like
God is love.
want to intellectually understand things, and I was able to be led to a lot of truth, and leading that all led back to the same conclusion I started with, that God is love. But now I intellectually understand it.
Right. And I believe that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to intellectually understand it. So, because I don't know, in my mind, if I'm gonna believe in something, I will need to understand it as much as I can before I can go all in, if that makes sense.
That makes a
Um,
lot of sense.
but I don't know, and that's just the way I go about it. Is all. It's not. I don't know. It's just the way I need to do it, and
Most of us guys are that way.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I do a lot of stuff the hard way.
Yeah, welcome. That's welcome to the club.
Yeah. Um.
Interesting definition of faith, though, is as Hebrews 11:6. It actually says faith is the evidence of things unseen, the substance of things hoped for. If you think about it, the evidence of things unseen and the substance of things hoped for. There isn't anything in your life that would be worthy going down if there's no hope in it, right?
Hmm.
You wouldn't get married if there wasn't hope for a happy future. You wouldn't have kids if there wasn't a hope that they're going to bring you joy and you're going to, you know, have a fulfilling life with more offspring. Uh, and there isn't a point of following a God if there's no hope. And He gives us the hope of eternal life. So it's the substance of things hoped for, but then the first part of it is the evidence of things unseen. And the interesting part of Hebrews 11, it actually begins faith. We understand that out of what is seen was created of what is unseen. So it's actually saying the unseen created the seen. And that takes faith to even believe that. But there's evidence in that. And that's what it requires. So by intellectually seeking, you're actually doing it in a biblical way because you're looking for the evidence.
So it's interesting you say that because I was talking to my wife the other day, and she's about to finish her degree in Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, and we were talking about. She was talking about total transformation. So it's just like with anything, or we're talking about polarity. Like um, one will eventually become the other within time. So you're talking about the unseen being seen, or created by the unseen. The unseen,
Yeah.
like one, like they will become each other eventually. like just to the course of nature.
Right.
Um, and it makes also sense. You said the seen being created by the unseen. Is that what it said? You said?
Yeah. Out of what is unseen created this what is seen. Basically, the invisible created the visible.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, let's just go to it real quick. I got my
Yeah.
computer up. Sometimes I paraphrase really well. Sometimes I repeat it verbatim. I used to be really good at that when my memory was good.
Yeah,
Um,
mine just keeps
and my
going. Um, and that's one thing I thought about. I know I talked about this, but the first thing that kind of came to my head is when you're talking about being created by the unseen, and I was talking about Ezekiel, and I was talking about like the idea of aliens, right? Or
yeah,
extraterrestrials. There's a lot of footage that have caught these, not caught, recorded some of these. Well, they're calling them UAPs now, but they'll have one camera, which is a regular camera, which is sees in this light spectrum that we see in with our eyes, and then they'll use other cameras that have like infrared. And they're actually able to see these anomalies, but we can't see them with our naked eye. But it doesn't mean they don't exist. If that makes sense. Does that make sense? Where it's
yeah,
not
yeah,
there.
yeah. Right,
So with the same thing, if there are, not if there are, there's a lot of evidence that's kind of pointing to if you're taking all these different disciplines of understanding of, you know, transdimensional, like talking about ghosts earlier and things like that. But if we have the spectrum to see, if we had the ability to see through these different layers of reality, right? Then we'd be
yeah,
able to see those things, but we're limited due to our limited amount of wavelengths that we can see with our current set of eyes, if that makes sense.
right, right.
It
Yeah, that
was a
makes
long
sense.
way there, but we got there eventually.
Yeah, I follow what you're saying.
Because I mean, Einstein, I think said is like it's all relative, right? Like everything is, and you have to, if you want to see the bigger picture, then you have to zoom out and keep zooming out, and not just take one discipline of understanding. You have to combine them all from as much as you know within each discipline, and they all start to connect. They all start to make
Right.
sense to see the bigger picture. And that's kind of what I've been doing with other subjects as well. This is just kind of one of my latest ones.
Yeah,
But they're all
I say it.
relative.
I say it very similar. I say that any truth is built on many assumptions, and each assumption must be tested. And if one assumption is incorrect, then that assumption needs to be found, where you would then test the truth based on a new set of assumptions.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm reminded of every time I heard the word assume. I think in the military, they used to say, yeah.
Yeah, I know what they say. But from a even a scientific approach, if you make an assumption, you have to say an assumption because like a puzzle, a thousand piece puzzle, if you have one piece, that one piece is truth, but can you find another piece that interlocks with that piece? And then you'd have two truths that interlock. Those would be assumptions because until you put the whole thing together, you don't know how it all fits together.
Right.
So you'd have to call it an assumption. If you're honest, nobody has 100% truth. Nobody.
Right. No. And it's impossible to have that. Like I don't even know if I think you go insane if you knew all the truth
I think so.
because it would talking about like making your world like what's the word you used earlier? Jaded. Yeah, you'd be
Yeah.
a pretty jaded person. Actually realized all truth at the same time.
Yeah.
Your
Right.
head would explode.
And that is the story of the red letters of the New Testament when Jesus spoke, Yeshua spoke, because he did know, he even knew their thoughts. And he proved it by all the miracles that he did. Who is this person that could stop the wind in the sea? That's what made the masses of people follow him. And so he is the truth, and he know all truth. He knew all truth. He was the embodiment of truth. So, as infallible people that are not privy to all the answers of anything, the best way I say it is a set of assumptions, and we should be in the process of trying to align them, and we're probably always going to have a set of assumptions that changes, in your research.
Mm-hmm.
Any good researcher will know that the further they research, they realize how off they were in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've done some circles. Either
Oh,
yeah, and it's kind of funny because when I find myself back at the beginning, I'm just like, it would have been easier just to kind of accepted it, you know. Um,
right.
but it's kind of like you start out with that question and then you circle back and it's like, wow, that's crazy. Did you
So
find it?
I finally got it. Yeah, Hebrews 11:3. It says, by faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible.
Hmm.
Which paraphrase is the invisible created the visible.
Yeah,
So
and then
from the so it takes faith to know that.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just thinking about
Like
it. That's why I'm quiet. I'm just processing
in
that.
in a in a crime in a crime scene in the 1950s and 60s, they didn't know that DNA evidence would have been able to tell who was at the crime.
That's true.
And so now they can do that, and they treat it very carefully. Even I read an article that a crime that was committed 40 years ago, they followed a guy, and he had chewing tobacco and spit it on the ground, and they tested his chewing tobacco, and so they got his DNA.
Wow.
That's unseen, right? We can't see that in our normal eyes, but now we know that our body is made up of this complex organism with all this DNA. So even that's true, that we're made of what is unseen.
That is true. I mean, now we could see it, but it took time. Like for a long time, it was invisible, and that's like if you break down each layer of the human, it's pretty miraculous just to look at it, like the physiology and like the way everything works and um what each function of each organ like does. I mean, people could say it's evolution, but at the same time, if you kind of go down these rabbit holes of understanding, it's like you start to come up with the same answer. Like it has to be more than that. It can't just be uh the way everything works on this planet. Like it's so, and we don't even see all that. Like most people see a tree and they just see a tree. But if you understand like how they communicate with each other, how they um like if there's a threat from one of them, like one's being eaten by I don't know, larva or what have you, they start to form like a toxin to try to protect that tree. Or if one doesn't have water, then they'll give water or like nutrients to other trees. And just on that very level, like to understand at each layer of each thing that lives on this planet, it's it's pretty fascinating at the basis of it. So there has I guess what I'm trying to say is there has to be a bigger picture to it. There has to be like architect, if you will, because everything just works the way it does, and it's so efficient if we just allowed it to be efficient. Does that make
Right,
sense?
right. It is.
Um,
It's perfect in its design. Even creation. The sun comes up and the flowers begin to open, but the bees need the flowers to open to pollinate the the flower,
mhm.
and then they take it, and the whole cycle needs each other of creation.
Right.
So you see the handiwork even within the organisms. Even we need each other. People, we need relationship, we need communion. Without being in sync with one another, we're anxiety, depression, and isolation.
Yeah, it's definitely one thing that technology has exposed. I mean, I don't think a lot of people are willing to. I don't say a lot of people, but I think a lot of people are starting to understand it now with documentaries coming out that kind of highlighting those things within technology and social media and all these things that kind of keep us. It's supposed to make us more connected, but it's more of a virtual connection than actual natural connection. So therefore,
Yeah,
we feel isolated, even though we think we're connected. It's doing
right.
the opposite because, yeah, I mean, the only other thing, if we go far enough in the future, we would. It seems like we're slowly trying to create this virtual world where we're going to exist on an online as an avatar. If we continue to go down this path, we will, like, if we don't destroy ourselves first, or the next flood, we could talk about that because it's all through the course of history. That's one thing in the Bible, and you look at most um, cultures in history around the world, they all talk about a flood, a great flood.
Right.
Um, so
Yeah,
that's
you
one
can't
thing
avoid
that,
it.
right. And if you, there's a person I listen to is Randall Carlson. He's a geologist and he works with Graham Hancock, but they talk about the Younger Dryas theory, which was about 12,600 years ago. They look at the sediment in the soil, where there was like the last catechism, catech, I want to,
Cataclysmic.
thank you. I wanted to say like catechism for some reason, but like those two words are getting like stuck on each other. Anywho, uh, but what'd you say? Cataclysm? There you go. I got it.
Cataclysmic.
Right.
Cataclysmic.
And that's something that's cyclical, based off of the core samples and reports they got from Antarctica all the way down to like just different parts of the world. So it's pretty fascinating to hear those things. Um, but with that, it's also, yeah. So I forgot where I was going with that, but yeah, I'm still processing what we were talking about earlier, and I'll continue to do that long after this podcast is over. I think that's why I took a break from the last one. I was just like really trying to go down these rabbit holes for different understanding for myself. And then we had that phone call and then we set this up. So here we are. Um,
Great.
but so, so it was just a feeling that you weren't getting right when you're doing, when you were, in, did you have just a feeling? Was your wife, or like, were you guys married at the time when we were going, when you're Catholic?
No, no, I didn't. I grew up in Iowa,
Got you.
and I moved to San Diego, California, to set up a business in 1999. And through that process, I found Jesus through. I was in Chicago, Illinois, in a suburb there, when I walked into that gymnasium, thinking I'm going to play basketball, and I end up in a church service,
Right.
and that began me really asking a lot of questions. I just didn't know what I didn't know, and I didn't even know I needed to be seeking. I was completely clueless.
Yeah.
I was pursuing a worldly, I was good at sales and pursuing a worldly ambition of being rich and having a big house someday and getting married, all that stuff. I didn't know that there was a real hole in my soul. I felt it. Anybody could have tell that I didn't have much hope. It didn't seem like I had any hope. a purpose, I should say. I didn't know what my purpose was, and I didn't know I needed to find it. So until I actually started like, wow, this is a novel idea. They actually read the Bible. See, the Catholics will, the Catholic Church, they frown on you having to read the Bible, or they don't encourage you to, because that's the priest's job. And they only open it up and they give you two verses for the week. And then it's all rituals after that. So I was like, wow, this is quite an idea. And I asked a lot of questions, joined a Bible study, and I just started, tearing it up. So when I moved to San Diego, that's when I met my wife after that. And she said, in her own words, that her friends would have said she would have been an astronaut before becoming a Christian. Um, so I took her hostage to church literally a couple of
Oh,
times, just because I knew if I could get her in the presence of the worship and the teaching of the Bible, that eventually she would come around, and she did. And I'm like, well, I guess I got to marry her now that she became a believer through me. No, there was love involved, but that's kind of the progression of events there.
got you.
I was so on fire. If you would have met me and I was your friend, I'd have been talking about Jesus all day long.
Oh, you talking about back then?
Yeah, back
Oh,
then.
got you,
I mean,
got
I,
you.
I would probably be more meeting you on an intellectual level now,
Right,
and try to overcome a lot of, maybe some of the doubts you have, or especially the issues of the Bible, and show you things that I found that
right.
I believe will, as long as you had a central, childlike, could it be? Could it be that this really is the Word of God? And the better way to look at that is these are eyewitnesses that wrote down the accounts of what they saw. If you saw somebody raised from the dead, you would probably tell somebody about it, or maybe do a news story on it. In fact, I'll bet you would do a podcast. Let me interview you next week with the guy that raised from the dead,
Yeah,
right?
before it dies again. Yeah, I got you.
Even if it
Uh,
was Lazarus, you like Lazarus. Hey, what happened? You won't believe it, dude. I was just going my own way, and I blinked, and all of a sudden I'm in a tomb, and I'm wrapped with these linens,
mhm.
and then I stunk. Everybody is like holding their nose because I had been in there for 4 days, and my friend Jesus, this guy Yeshua, he told me to come forth. You know, you're like, tell me more about it, man. You see, that's the excitement that you should read what is written, because these are eyewitnesses of people that parted a Red Sea. They walked through it when their enemy was chasing after them. There's real stories of a guy that had his eyes gouged out, and he's the strongest man around, and he figured that, look, I'm going to at least do one good task before I die. And Samson, he took the pillars himself and crumbled the whole place on all the people. These are exciting stories. These are real events.
I know
It's not a like,
Giants is like one of them too that I found like a parallel with is like when the
yes,
Bible talks about giants, because at one time I was like, what giants? Like where giants come from? But
yeah,
like there's mountains around the United States that have I think they did GPR, ground penetrating radar, and
yeah.
oh, also there was articles of Abraham Lincoln where he's taking, I don't know if he's taking a picture of one or he's references the giants of the past once roamed these lands or something like that. I'm paraphrasing here. But there's also like technical data as well with these mountains like in Ohio and stuff like that. So there are a lot of truth in the Bible, but it's just like these other ones, right? That we're trying to seek for ourselves in whatever way. But
Well,
um,
it's a movie. It has a beginning with a king and a kingdom. That would be Adam, and he was given the whole world, and he even named the animals. And then he was kicked out and banished from that kingdom. But there's another king coming that conquered what Adam couldn't do. He conquered death, and he's got a kingdom coming. That's the beginning, and that's the end. And everything in between is part of that story.
I
So
know.
you're not going to read aliens in the Bible. You're not going to read other subjects that are not related to that theme. But the theme of salvation and eternal life is based on that theme, and all the books of the Bible interweave on that same theme. If that makes sense.
hmm Did you ever go down the path of like the Book of Enoch? Because I know he's mentioned
I
in like
did.
in Genesis.
I did. I went down that path a long ways, and I personally am not inspired by the what is called the Book of Enoch that we've been presented. I believe that was a bunch of astrologers, maybe after Daniel's day,
hmm
and it is not inspired in my opinion. Now, I did read the Book of Jasher, and that is, in my opinion, because I cross reference all the truths that I know, and I know these truths by these set of assumptions that I told you that I know are backed and true, and I
hmm
know where the pieces of the puzzle go. I don't have them all, but I have enough to go, that just doesn't fit, or that does fit. And it didn't mean that when I began reading the Book of Jasher, I just found everything pretty much fit. The storyline is seamless, and it seems to it intersects the parts of the Bible that are mentioned, and then the other parts it fills in some of the gaps. Do you know about the Book of Jasher?
No, I just wrote it down, so I can reference that. Probably not right now.
It's an incredible extra biblical writing with incredible feats, and it gives us things like Moses' staff. Where did it come from? It came from the Garden of Eden. Um, that it was carried along the way by even Nimrod. And then Esau, that was the whole story of Esau selling his birthright for a bowl of soup. Do you know that story in the Bible?
I've heard of that one. Yes.
And you're like, why would Esau sell his birthright, which is your most valuable possession, for a bowl of soup? This doesn't even make sense. Well, the book of Jasher fills in the gap. Jasher was went and shot and killed Nimrod. Nimrod was the world leader at the time, and he had troops coming after him. So Esau thought he was as good as dead, and he basically gave it to his brother and just says he basically had his final meal.
Hmm.
And so now you got, whoa, that makes sense.
Got you.
The clothes from Adam and Eve, they had clothing that was knit together after the fall because they were naked to begin with, and those clothes were passed down as well.
And
And
who
you
was
read all these.
Jasser?
The word Jasher isn't a person; it means
Okay.
upright. It means upright. So it's basically the book of the upright, the book of the righteous, you could say. And by the way, the book of Jasher is mentioned twice in the Bible as well, just like the book of Enoch. Enoch is mentioned in the book of Jude, but the book of Jasher is mentioned one time in the book of Joshua and another time in Second Samuel. And so there really was a book of Jasher, and that's what this was. Now,
Who wrote the Book of Jasher?
we don't know. We just don't know because it does begin with it does give some accounts of creation. It does talk about Noah's day, some very interesting things about Noah's day, and then it goes into the 12 sons of Israel. So it's covering like 2,500, 3,000 years. It ends in Joshua's day. So I mean, it could have been Joshua. Maybe Moses wrote it,
Hmm.
but it did end after Moses' life. Um, but see what again why I know that there was an inspiration behind it because nobody can make this stuff up. If you make something up, there has to be if something's completely made up, then you should be able to cross reference and go, I didn't find any evidence of anything here, right? Like the Book of Mormon, the Book of Mormon is the lost Americas, where there are lost people and lost places here in America, and none of that's been found. And you go, hey, that's just all made up because there's no evidence of this.
I haven't
But
read I haven't read the Book of Mormon. Not yet, anyways. But Yeah. So
Yeah, you're going to find places that never existed. So if there's places that never existed, or you can find evidence of it, then how can you believe what's written in it? Like,
yeah.
so the book of Jasher cross-referenced the main issues of the Bible that Moses wrote, but it gave a lot of extra details that are just way too it's beyond the mind of somebody that can make it up. Now, another thing about ancient writings is important to understand. Do you know where Greek mythology came? You know, Zeus and all these writings, Achilles and all these hero stories.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to Homer writing the Iliad and the Odyssey in about 900 BC, have you heard of those two books?
Mm-hmm.
Those were the most ancient book besides the Old Testament that in ancient literature, and that was the first time documented that there was a fictional story. Ancient writings were all factual.
Oh, so like books about like fantasy and all these things weren't a thing.
You
Is
you,
that what I'm
you wouldn't
understanding?
see you wouldn't see Star Trek, a Star Trek book,
Got you.
back in Moses' day. Back in Moses' day, there was no such thing as making stuff up and using your imagination and entering into another realm, and
Mm-hmm.
what most of our society is with video games and fictional movies and you know fairy
Right.
tales and Harry Potters and all that stuff. So that's what makes it, in our mind, it makes it very difficult because our imagination allows us to go in places that don't exist, they're not true, like the Book of Mormon. But ancient literature was all factual. Like you said, the flood, there was a lot of documents of the flood. They
Mm-hmm.
just didn't make stuff up. It wasn't until the Iliad
So,
and the Odyssey,
so it was like
and then
just
there
really
was,
like recorded history. Like
right.
the we're the I'm that's what I was trying to get to. That's why I was quiet. It was like trying to what would it be at that time? Why would we need to write things down? Is it like to keep a log or like to like, hey, tell my story or like this is our story, like historical records. It's like,
Right.
on base we used to have a historian, they would keep track of anything that went on base. And so it makes sense from that standpoint, like if when you need to document what happened here, whatever that was. So that's
Yeah.
why books were kept. Is that makes sense. Um,
Yeah. Records. And when you read the Bible, you're like, gosh, Genesis chapter 5. But see, that's the point.
you're coming in broken.
Moses is
Sorry.
making an important genealogy. So and so begot so and so. Oh, is
Yeah, you were you
that
were
better?
coming in broken. I couldn't hear what you're saying.
Like
The
like
last word I heard was Genesis.
Genesis chapter 5.
Okay.
It's a little bit boring because it's all the full of a bunch of names. An important genealogy that Moses is writing.
Unfortunately, coming in broken again. Sorry.
Maybe I'll hold the phone here. Is that any better?
I think so. I mean, right now it is.
Okay,
You're talking about
I'll try it from
Genesis and
here.
Moses.
Yeah, Genesis chapter 5 is like a very dull chapter. It seems like, because it's a bunch of names in there. But see, Moses is recording an important genealogy.
Yeah, that's one. I was trying to figure out what the purpose of that was. Like, I found it interesting how it was just, and it makes sense from that standpoint. I just didn't understand, like, why is he recording every person and how long they lived for? And that's pretty much what it was. It was, I don't want to say all of Genesis, but a good amount of Genesis.
Well,
So and so lived to this and begot this children. And
let's convert it to the story, because it's a story you're reading. Okay, it's a movie. It's a movie. So Genesis chapter 5 is in between Genesis chapter 3 and Genesis chapter 7 through 9, right? Genesis 3 is Adam getting kicked out of God's presence, but given a promise. The promise was that from your seed will become one that will crush the head of the serpent. That's that's the singular. There will be a singular seed. Genesis chapter 7 through 9 is the world being destroyed by a flood because of the problem of crossbreeding. The devil, the enemy, was coming in having sex with these fallen angels or having sex with women, and they were crossbreeding and contaminating the genealogy pool. God was concerned with keeping that genealogy pure, the pure from Adam. And so that's what Moses is recording, the pure genealogy between Adam and Noah. Because the rest of the people were becoming corrupt. The genealogy was. The giants.
Right.
The
Yeah.
giant theme is all through the Old Testament. And that's the main thing is that's why, like, hey, God is so mean. He's not, he told them to go in and kill the men and the women and the children and all their animals. It's because their genealogy was, their genes were corrupt. They all had genes from giants. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it does. And as you were talking about that, I was thinking about the book of Enoch when it talks about all these angels and then coming down and having sex, and then what these angels taught man, um, how to make weapons of war, and so forth and so on, astrology, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But shifting gears over to the Bible, I'm trying to remember like how much in depth it got into that or didn't. But if you were to kind of connect, and that's one thing I at the time when I read it, haven't gone down the path of figuring out who wrote it, why they wrote it, or what have you. But with that, it's also like one thing I appreciated was it gave like a backstory, kind of like you're talking about the book of Jasher,
Yeah.
to try to understand like what this, like what was going on in the background, like what was, I don't know, like for
Dude,
curiosity's.
I'm really excited. If you read that, I really want to hear what you got out of it because you will be, this will be a brand new, fresh story, and it is a backdrop of what you would read in Genesis as well, with a lot
Okay.
of extra details. Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I'll definitely check it out. But yeah, it's and then fast forward, like one of the things that kind of happened recently in the sense of like what kind of lit a fire under it, to try to understand for myself, is just a bunch of different things that have happened. But one of them was I came across it doesn't sound crazy to say, but I came across like a documentary or that a stuntman in Hollywood made. Um, he was just talking about how he never believed in God or the idea of, like, he just wasn't brought up that way. Like it wasn't talked about in his household, etc. He went into Hollywood, was a stuntman for like 20 plus years, and then he got injured, and he went to go get, it was a really bad injury. He went to go get work done by a physical therapist post surgery or what have you. And one female there kept insisting on wanting to pray for him, and he didn't believe in any of it. But he was just like, yeah, sure, knock yourself out, kind of thing. But through the course of her constantly praying for him and him saying okay, he finally asked her like, why do you keep wanting to pray for me? And she was like, you have, like, stuff on you. um and so she prayed for him, and then he was like, what are you talking about? And so she was just like, well, like talking about all these things that existed like within like Hollywood and like the movie industry, and people worshiping like, uh these deities. And I don't know, I stopped short of saying the names of them, but like worshiping these deities kind of like, worshiping the devil pretty much. And he was just like, what are you
Yeah.
talking about? And so he started to kind of like look at things differently, and just started to notice things like when he went to other people's houses, like some of the stuff that they kept in their houses. And he did his research, like trying to follow this path, like truth seekers. Well, that's not what the word was, but he was seeking the truth in whatever way that was. And then kind of started paying attention more to certain things. And he kind of put this hour and change movie together and talked about like programming and like, I've those are rabbit holes I've gone down too. It's just so when you look at a movie, and it sounds crazy to say because at one point in time, I felt this false narrative like, well, why would somebody would surely say something, right? If there were has any type of mal or bad intentions to make whatever or put out whatever information or create some, I don't know, medicine that's actually bad for you or whatever, food or whatever. Because there's, in my mind, there's authorities that would say something or try to, protect the people, right? In that sense.
Yeah.
So he kind of went down this rabbit hole, and I've done those as well, like just looking at movies and like, why is it kind of that way? Especially when I started video editing, I started to identify like how you can turn something like just some boring film that or boring recording that you made, and then you could change it in any way you can, like any way you want to make it either more scary or like more fun with the music you choose, the coloring, and the way you cut it, right? To make it entertaining or not. But with that, if you have all these years of, of doing so, and there are people that would nefarious purposes or like reasoning to create like a film to try to influence, especially if you understand humans, the psychology of a human or humans, and how highly influential we are. So the idea of whether you're constantly eating something, you eventually start becoming that food. If you watch something, like you constantly watching like stress, high stress shows like reality TV, you're going to be stressed out. Your body doesn't know the difference, but you will start being conditioned in those ways. So with that, he went down these, in Hollywood, and he started to identify like these A-list like celebrities and people that they used to go to. And when after they went to this person, they started becoming more famous and started getting put in the spotlight. But some of the stuff that they were doing at some of these parties were um, like it wasn't a human they were cooking, but it was similar to that. Like there was like legs on the table and stuff. It's
Oh,
it's crazy to think. Like if I went to a party and I saw that, maybe it was Halloween, but either way, it would still be really strange to me to go that depth of to, and then people were serving themselves off this table of food, but it looked like there was a human that they were eating. Does that make sense? I
yeah.
mean, I'm not saying it makes sense in the sense that you would do that, but just so that's just one thing. And then like so this film is kind of what it's like one cannot exist without the other. You can't have black without white. You can't have dark without sun. Like you can continue down the path. So if there's evil, there's got to be good, and vice versa.
Right. Right.
You can go down all these different examples of that.
Hmm.
So with that, it's kind of like start pulling the string more, paying attention to that intuition of like, there's something to this. Like, let me start to, or curiosity, whatever word you want to use, to start to try to pull that thread more for my own understanding of like really paying attention to what's really going on. Like it's this facade of you need to buy these things and do these things and be this or be that or dress like this, dress like that because somebody else says so, because that's the theme. That's what, is popular. That's what everyone is doing. Like this stopped making sense to me. And I really started to, you know, you see the Wizard of Oz, like who's the wizard, like who's behind
Yeah.
it, who's pulling the strings. And then when you look at these you know, like probably like handful of people that are controlling all the entertainment industry, they can easily control a narrative in any kind of way. to fit whatever they're trying to do. And if we're the consumer is the product, becomes the product, and they would want to control us to buy or do whatever they want. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense.
So it's again, it's zooming out, keep on zooming
Yeah.
out, and to try to see the bigger picture and really understand what is really going on. Um, but so yeah,
What
that's what kind of leads us here.
Yeah, it does. And then, you know, the only thing I really wanted to know at one point though was what about your soul though? What about your soul? What happens when you die? Isn't that like the biggest question we need to figure that out?
Yeah, I
If
mean,
that's our if that's our end goal, that's where you're gonna end up and your body's gonna be in a casket. And where did your person go? Where did your soul go?
yeah, I've thought about that a lot. Um,
How old
this,
are you?
43, 43. Yeah, 44 next year. Yeah,
Okay.
usually I ask my wife, but I've thought about that a lot. Um, and it's just I've gone down, the idea of consciousness. What is consciousness? And continue to like Buddhists talk about like meditation is preparation for death. Um,
Right.
and I've gone down like the idea that maybe this concept of hell is whatever we create it to be. Maybe it is a physical place, but that's one of the paths that I thought of. Like if we kind of go into this, if we're a good person, we do all the right things based off of the life choices that we were given to us at the time. I mean, wherever that tally is, I'm not sure, but when this one, I've tried to be a good human in the way I could and try to believe and lead people in that direction. And then I also try to make peace with myself and whatever, you know, ask for forgiveness from those people or give forgiveness for myself or God, and then go down this path, right? Or if I choose not to deal with it and I have all this shame and guilt for all the things that I've done and I've never tried to atone for any of them. And then I go down this
Yeah.
path and then I create my own hell based off of my understanding of what my consciousness knows what that to be. So whether it's fire, whether it's I don't know, reliving my worst day for the rest of my life. I mean, there's different variations of what hell could be. Uh, it's
Right.
it's I mean, at the end of the day, it's overall like based off of what I understand hell to be, it's like this endless like torment of the soul. So the soul
Right.
would be the mind or
Right.
consciousness or this energy, this life force that we are.
Right.
Um,
You
or
you
it could
could
be a
say
physical place.
you could say the absence of life or light.
Say that again.
You could say it could be the absence of life.
Yeah,
You
I
know.
mean, for those that choose to cling on to this life, yeah, but if you have this understanding that you're going to a better place and like in
Yeah.
heaven, like if you've done all the right things and you've to get fit into that, hole in the needle or eye of the needle, if you will,
Right.
then you're kind of at peace with whatever and you've asked for forgiveness from whomever, God, then you can go and exist in this place. And maybe that's that in the mind of the consciousness or the approval of, in the Bible, St. Peter. But yeah,
Did you ever wonder what is heaven? What is this? Is it floating on a cloud with a violin? What is
yeah,
this
I used to see it
abstract?
that way for a while. Not so much anymore, but I mean, it could be. I don't know. I mean,
But I don't know how everybody misses this. It's right there in the Bible. They say it's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. So if there's a new heaven and a new earth, are we on the old heaven or the old earth? And if we're in the old earth and there's a new heaven and a new earth, are we going to be in the new heaven or the new earth? And the story, remember, it's a movie. For the people that didn't read the first half of it or watch the first half of the movie, Adam was created from the dust of the ground on earth. Why does the story end up in a mystical, magical, nonsensical place called heaven up in the outer space somewhere. And why is it so hard to envision a world without death, without sickness, without tears, without problems, without the devil? That's the story of the Bible, that there's a new earth. And in the end of the story, in Revelation chapter 21, it says that New Jerusalem comes down out of heaven to earth.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's one of the things I've been tracking was when it happened, I was like, we're gonna go to war again pretty soon. But
Yeah.
like when I mean, whether you agree with Trump or not, I didn't agree. He was very divisive. But from that aside, when he, gave Israel or not Israel, Jerusalem back to or identified
Uh-huh.
it as Israel's, and then that kind of started the chain of events, right? I went, I think I was on YouTube and they're trying to fulfill the prophecy of the Bible, or not trying, but they are based off of getting the two red calves. Actually, two of them are some of them are from Texas. To
Right.
bring back, do all the things to bring back Jesus or God.
Right.
It's breaking up. So yeah,
Right.
so
It is? Is it breaking up?
yeah, I think that's better. I don't
Okay.
know if you heard what I said.
Yeah, I heard everything. I
Yeah.
have never heard you break up once.
Okay. Um, but yeah, it's like that's kind of like happening in the background and it doesn't get any like press or anything for whatever reason. But I was like, that's pretty. And if you kind of zoom out and if you would have kind of put this, how like back in the day they used to get I mean, at least back in my day, they like when you took a Scantron test, they had the sheet and they would put it over it.
Uh-huh.
So if you get like the Bible and everything that is in it and you place it over our current situation uh, of current events, and you kind of line that up, and then you can kind of see like the path where it could go. Talking about Revelations and talking about
Yeah.
the Antichrist, the third Antichrist, and all these things.
Right.
It's lining up pretty well, and it's kind of scary on like to a certain extent
Right.
because on one side of it's like that's a wild like story to read on, but and then to actually process it that it could happen possibly, like even if there's like a 1% chance, right, of that happening in our reality, then that's a scary 1%, right? um
Well, I'm about ready to maybe mention about five or six things all in a couple of sentences that could be a show in and of itself. But if you know the Illuminati and what Trump and Biden and all these puppets, they're all puppets in a grand plan by the bankers, the people that the Vatican controls as well. And they orchestrate all the world events. In fact, what's his name? The Church of Satan back in the 1800s.
yeah, it's
Um,
something
he,
McVeigh or something like
he,
that.
yeah. He had three world wars planned. The first two followed the script verbatim. This coronavirus, the vaccinations, putting this into people, getting everybody to believe the boogeyman is here, getting them afraid, running to go get their injection of what's going in their body. This is all part of their agenda. It's moving it to agenda. They even call it Agenda 30, which is 2030. They had a world meeting on this. Their goal is to get the population down to
you,
10% of what it's at right now by the year 2030. What's that?
you came in broken, you said something 10%.
Their agenda is to get the population of the world down to about 10% of what it is now by the year 2030
Dang.
in their
So
own writing.
I have been following that. I talked about it a few podcasts ago. It's just this like, again, going back to the idea how crazy this is, and but to hear what was his name? he was at the World Economic Forum, and I've been following this idea of the Great Reset for a while now. At first, it was
Bill
kind of
Gates.
entertaining, and then now, like as things move forward and more people are talking about it because they're becoming more aware of it. But what was his name? Eric,
Gates? Bill Gates?
no, it was he's I think he's German or I don't know, he's
Oh
German,
yeah.
Swedish or something. But he was just talking about like the
Yeah.
idea of putting something in people where you can pretty much have their total control. But he was just talking about like nonchalantly,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like in public, like at one of these. I'm like, and people were just kind of like, I don't know if they clapped, but they were just. It was so bizarre to say. Like you're like, is he joking or is he serious? But that's he didn't laugh. It just seemed like, yeah, that's kind of our next step. And I don't know. I mean, yeah, that's a lot. Like, and yeah, it's just I get stuck because I'm just like, again, it's like this. It's just taking off the veil of what it is, and then also having the understanding. Like 5, 7 years ago, if I would have heard me talking about what I'm talking about right now, I would have think like I'm full of it. Like
Right.
that I drank the Kool-Aid of whatever, but it's like
Right.
no, like if you continue to zoom out and like look at things from it, just with a separated set of eyes, just trying to look at it and not being so in the weeds on it. Yeah, it's pretty crazy because it's like stuff that would happen in a movie, you know.
Right.
And speaking of
Yeah.
which, also one of the things I saw recently too, the scientist, I think it was a Nat Geo article or something, where they discovered how to um, bring back dead tissue. Because you were talking about Lazarus earlier, and I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's how zombie movies start, like. But either way, that's like a small, like, I don't know, flare to chase, if
Right.
but yeah, that's a lot. I'm just thinking a lot right now of everything we've talked about and just kind of processing it because it's like one thing to kind of see these headlines, these articles, these interviews, and it's been happening for a while, and to it's like a surreal feeling to try to connect all these dots and just start to see things in the I don't know the way they are.
Yeah.
It's it's overwhelming, I guess. And I also
I
try to
I
go ahead.
so many people are deceived on so many levels, but I was always of the opinion I would rather know. That way you at least know with no, but you'd rather know, right?
Yeah, the last thing you said, I was of the opinion that I'd rather know, and then I heard you rather know, right? Yeah, I'm the same way. It's it because I played with those ideas in my head. Like there's a movie that came out. It's called Don't Look Up, and I saw the movie, but at the end of it, it just kind of was a great example of like one house where they knew it was coming and they were just like fearful. They had this amazing dinner and they kissed each other or whatever, and then the world ended. But the house right next to them, they had no idea. They're just watching their sitcom show or whatever, and then like the world's taken out. They both go out just the same, but for some reason, I'd rather know than not know. And
Yeah.
but at the same time, I appreciate this statement more and more every day. Ignorance is bliss because it can be, but I don't know. I just would rather know. And
Right.
I don't know why that is, but because I could be talking about all kinds of other stuff, and I do. but just this is kind of one of the rabbit holes I've been going down lately, and it's one that I've been on a I've been kind of going in and out of for a while, in and out of phase with. So not like like phase like of uh, sine waves, I guess. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah. Well, hopefully the folks listening are just hopefully I'm hitting on questions and ideas that they may have had because these questions and these points that I'm not really points, but these things that I've gone down, I haven't even hit them all. But are legitimate ideas and thoughts that I've had with the idea around religion, or just God in general. And there's a bunch of different, I could talk, and I probably will talk to people in Judaism, if I can find somebody like a rabbi or something, talk to them. But somebody that's able to think external from themselves and approach it analytically. It's really hard to talk to, and it's kind of, I mean, to each their own. It's hard to talk to somebody that's not willing to step outside of their doctrine and answer questions. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah. Many people, especially religious people, they put themselves in a box that they're not willing to come out of or try to allow you to be out of it.
right. And that turns out off a lot of people, not like in the sense of because it squashes their like curiosity. If I think if you're willing to follow something, then you should be willing to be, open to different questions and understand that not everyone is at the same part of the path that you feel you are at. And
Yeah.
also like embody it, right? Be like not only talk about it, but walk it, walk the path as well, which is the hardest part. It's one thing knowing, it's another thing walking it. And that's on anything, whether it's fitness, whether it's, I don't know, riding bikes, whether it's religion, whatever, because anybody that's looking to follow somebody, not in the sense of like, just a leader in general, they're not going to follow somebody that's not, you know, living that life and just talking about it.
Right. That's true. Yeah,
But
you got to be able to be authentic. I think that's a good way to put it.
yeah,
Authentic to your belief.
yes, sir. But yeah, well, I think we'll, unless you want to like finish it off with something, I guess at the end of it, let's just kind of close it with unless you have any questions for me. I mean, I'll leave it at, and then I'll ask you this last question. It's probably the only question I wrote
Uh,
down.
no, no, not really. It's been fun being with you. It's been
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. And I appreciate your approach. And I'm still going to, of course, like I want to read that book, Jasser. Check that out. And then I'll probably ping you with questions, after this.
Yeah, I'm
Not tonight.
excited to hear. I'm
Yeah.
excited to hear what you have to come up with.
Yeah. Cause that's just how my brain works. It doesn't shut off. Um, but I guess at the end of it, like if you had, I don't know, if you had to convince someone or if you had to just say something that would, I don't know, let's say this is like, what would you tell someone like at the end of it? Like, if you knew you weren't going to see him again, and just like, hey, this is why I would follow my idea of God or God in general. Like what would that be?
Like advice to them.
Yeah, yeah, like to me or to anyone, like based off of like your experience
I
of
would I
coming to
would
understanding.
I would plead with them to narrow it down to the man that walked on this earth and to read his own words and what he did and to believe him and follow his teaching. not Buddhist teaching, not self-made 12-step programs, whatever man has to give you. The greatest psychologist, the man who walked on this earth, read his own words.
And I'll say that one thing you said, greatest psychologist. I don't know about the greatest, but Jordan. I don't know if you listen to Jordan Peterson at all. He's a psychologist. I listen to some of his talks and speaks, and he's kind of gone
Uh-huh.
down the same rabbit hole, different time than me, kind of coming to the same conclusion. You know, at one time you could say he was atheist or agnostic, but just through pulling the thread for his in his own way, because I believe his wife is I don't know if she's a Christian, but she's believes in God. He talks about God in general. But to kind of hear him extrapolate all these different um, thoughts of origin and ideas in the Bible, and he talks about the Bible and cites the Bible. But to kind of hear him kind of go through that process of understanding so much so where he's starting to see that the this idea of God or God is real, and you can go down like the different paths or what have you. If you get to the end, eventually with anything, you'll get there, if that makes sense. Um, it's kind of like all roads lead to Rome, but in a different sense.
That's what religion says, but again, if it doesn't intersect with the man who died and rose again, and you follow his teaching, and
Right,
he's the way, you're never gonna miss. You're not always gonna miss the mark.
right. No, yeah, I see what you're saying. That's a fair point. Um, I guess the way I was seeing it in my mind, I was seeing it differently. But yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, I appreciate your time, and yeah, hopefully, like going back to the original thing where you're talking about if you're not doing this for a purpose, then what's the purpose of doing it? I do it with the original, like with not the understanding that people are gonna listen to it, if that makes sense. Because
Yeah,
if I focus on I need listeners and I need people to watch this and like uh believe in whatever I have to say, like that's that's not my goal. I'm not trying to get famous on this. I enjoy talking to people, hearing their perspectives, their views on different things. Sometimes we get into crazy categories and stuff like that. But at the end of it, it's just a natural curiosity to kind of understand people from a different perspective, even though I don't always agree with how they see the world or view the world. Because the trick is for connective to be connected is to focus on the commonalities, not this the differences.
right,
Um, but if that makes sense, but
right on. Absolutely,
um,
absolutely.
yeah, but yeah,
That, that's
again,
a that's a great that's a great cause to try to connect with people and to find a common ground and if ultimately the goal is truth, and you can help people find it
yeah,
by
yeah,
asking questions.
yeah. Help find myself too at the same time.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah, but again, I appreciate your time. I know it's late. But yeah, I appreciate your time. Glad we did this, and yeah, um, I look forward to trying to ping you about other questions as this kind of unfolds.
Okay, great, man. Well, Simon, it was great talking to you. Glad we met, and I hope to hear from you someday soon.
Yes, sir. All right. Have a good evening.